Story 1.
The island that looked safe, I agreed to spend 3 months on that island because it sounded quiet. That's the honest reason. I was 26, burnt out from city noise, and the idea of cataloging seabird migration patterns on a small environmental research station felt almost peaceful. No traffic, no neighbors, just water, wind, and a routine that made sense. The island sat about 5 miles off the mainland, not remote enough to feel dramatic, but far enough that you couldn't swim it, even if you were desperate. A supply boat came every Tuesday and Friday. Groceries, fuel, mail, for staff members total. We shared a main building, 2 small cabins, and a storage shed for equipment. Everything ran on a diesel generator that we checked twice a day. Predictable, manageable. When I first arrived, I remember thinking it didn't even feel like a horror setting. It felt like a screensaver, the kind of place people pay money to disconnect. The water was clear enough to see straight down to the rocks. At night, the sky was so open, it almost looked artificial. The work was simple. Data logs in the morning, shoreline surveys in the afternoon. Evenings were for cooking, reading, or sitting on the dock watching the tide roll in. We locked doors out of habit, not fear. There was no one else out there. No houses, no passing boats except the supply run and the occasional distant fishing vessel that never came close. The first week felt like a reset for my brain. Sleep came easier. My phone barely had signal, but that was part of the appeal. You couldn't scroll even if you wanted to. If you had asked me then whether I felt safe, I would have said yes without thinking. There was nothing about the island that suggested otherwise. It wasn't the kind of place where things went wrong. At least, that's what I believed before the supply boat started missing its schedule near the end. The first small inconsistency, the first few weeks settled into a rhythm that felt almost boring, and I mean that in a good way. We logged shoreline erosion measurements every morning, rotated through water sampling stations, and checked the generator before dinner. There were only 5 of us on the island, and routines mattered. When you're that far from the mainland, predictability becomes its own kind of comfort. The first thing that felt off was so small, I almost didn't mention it. I keep my field notebook inside a waterproof case. Always sheephead always on the left corner of the main lab table. I'm particular about that. One morning it was on the right side instead. Not far. Just not where I left it. I assumed I'd moved it without thinking. Later that day, I noticed the tide gauge toolkit had been shifted a few inches closer to the wall. Again, nothing dramatic, no missing tools, no signs of damage, just slightly repositioned. When I brought it up to Marcus during generator checks, he laughed. "You're living in a floating rock with 4 other people," he said. "Stuff gets moved." He wasn't wrong. We shared space. People borrowed equipment, it made sense. But the thing was, we were careful. Supplies were limited, and misplacing even a small wrench could slow work for days. Everyone had habits. We all knew each other's patterns by the end of week 1. The next morning, the handheld radio I kept charging by my bunk was unplugged. Not drained, just unplugged. The cable was coiled neatly beside it. I hadn't touched it. I asked around at breakfast. No one admitted to moving it. Not defensively. Just casually confused. "Why would I unplug your radio?" Sam asked. "Mine works fine." That should have been the end of it. Instead, I started noticing more tiny things. A clipboard angled differently, a chair slightly pulled out from the lab bench, the pantry door not latched all the way. Individually, each detail meant nothing. Together, they created a quiet irritation I couldn't explain. Nothing was broken. Nothing was stolen. Nothing overtly wrong. Just adjusted. At night, lying in my bunk, with the generator humming steadily outside, I told myself it was normal shared space friction. 5 people, tight quarters, small island. Of course, things would shift. Still, by the second week, I started mentally marking where I left things before bed. Just to be sure. I didn't say that part out loud. Footprints that weren't ours. The rain came hard that night. Not a storm, just a steady, soaking downpour that turned the dirt paths into dark, smooth clay. By morning, the sky had cleared and the air felt washed and sharp. It was a kind of morning where everything looks reset. That's why I noticed the prints. They were near the storage shed behind the generator housing. At first glance, I assumed one of us had checked fuel levels early. But when I stepped closer, I realized the tread pattern wasn't familiar. We all wore standard work boots. Same supplier, same basic design. These prints were wider. The heel impression was deeper. The tread had a distinct cross-hatched pattern I had seen before. There were only 3 clear impressions before the ground turned rocky again. I stood there longer than I needed to, trying to convince myself I was misjudging size. Maybe the rain distorted them. Maybe one of the guys had older boots I hadn't paid attention to. At breakfast, I mentioned it casually. Anyone go by the shed before sunrise? 4 blank looks. Marcus shrugged. Rain brings old tracks back up sometimes. Ground shifts. It sounded reasonable. The soil was soft. Maybe previous supply crews had left marks weeks ago, and the rain exposed them again. I let it go. But the next morning, after another lighter rain, I saw them again. This time they weren't near the shed. They were along the path that ran between the lab building and the dorm cabins. Not directly outside. Just closer. Again, only partial impressions. A heel here. Half a sole there. Always cutting off before the ground changed texture. I didn't point them out immediately. Instead, I compared one of my boots to the print. Mine were smaller. The tread didn't match. When I finally mentioned it, Sam actually walked out to look. He stared at the ground for a while, hands on his hips. Could be from last month's maintenance crew, he said. Rain makes things look fresh. But why here? I asked. Why not near the duck? He didn't answer that. No one seemed alarmed. That almost made it worse. By the third morning, the impressions appeared just beyond the dorm steps. Not on them, just a few feet away. Like whoever made them had stopped short. The pattern was subtle but undeniable. Shed, path cabans. Moving inward. Still no full trail. Still no clear direction. Just fragments. I found myself scanning the tree line more often during the day. The island wasn't large, a few hundred yards across, at its widest point. Low brush, scattered trees, open sightlines, toward the shoreline. If someone were here, we would have seen them. That's what I kept telling myself. But when it rained again 2 nights later, I didn't sleep well. And in the morning, before anyone else woke up, I stepped outside, alone, to check the ground. Because by then, I wasn't looking for old prints resurfacing. I was checking how close they'd gotten. The radio interference, we had scheduled radio check-ins every night at 10:30 p.m. with the mainland office. It was routine. Confirm weather conditions, fuel levels, water data. Nothing complicated. The signal usually carried clean across the water, unless there was heavy fog. The first time it happened, I assumed it was normal interference. I was alone in the lab finishing the call. The others had turned in early. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly overhead, and the generator's steady thrum bled through the walls. I pressed the transmit button and read off the standard update. Station 3 reading stable. No equipment issues. Weather clear. As soon as I released the button, I heard it. Clear, soft, delayed. Half a second after I'd spoken. I froze, thinking I'd accidentally clipped my own transmission through feedback. I pressed transmit again. Repeat last confirmation. A pause, confirmation. Same delay. Same tone. Not distorted. Not robotic. Just quieter. Almost like someone standing behind me, repeating what I said under their breath. I checked the panel. No signal overlap indicator. No secondary channel open. I switched frequencies and tried again, testing alternate channel. Silence. I waited. Nothing came back. The mainland operator finally responded on the original frequency, asking if everything was fine. His voice was normal clear. No H. I didn't mention it. After the call, I ran a basic diagnostic on the radio. Connections were secure. Antenna aligned. No crossed wires. Marcus helped me the next morning. We opened the casing, checked for moisture intrusion, recalibrated the transmitter. No issues. Probably atmospheric bounce, he said. Sound reflects weird over water. It sounded technical enough to believe. The next night, I volunteered to handle the check-in again. At 10:30, I gave the update. Everything normal. Primera. Ha. Wa. Aited. Nothing. I almost felt relieved. Then I added, all readings stable. A beat. Stable. The word came back softer this time. Almost perfectly synced, but still trailing me. I didn't release the transmit button. My thumbs stayed pressed down, which meant the voice wasn't coming through our outgoing channel. It was receiving. I slowly removed my thumb. Silence. Who is this? I said, trying to keep my tone even. No answer. I repeated, identify yourself. Nothing. It never spoke first. Never added anything new. It only mirrored me. Over the next few nights, it happened 3 more times. Not every call, just enough to stay unpredictable. Each time, the delay shortened slightly. By the 4th incident, The echo was almost simultaneous, close enough to feel like it wasn't trailing me anymore, but matching me. The boat that didn't dock, the supply boat, came every Tuesday and Friday. Same time, just after noon. We could almost set our watches to it. By week 5, the sound of its engine had become background comfort. It meant fresh food, mayo, replacement filters. It meant we weren't cut off. That Tuesday, we heard it right on schedule. Marcus stepped out first, wiping his hands on a rag. I followed him down toward the dock. The engine noise grew louder as the boat came around the eastern side of the island. But instead of lining up with the dock, it slowed. Then, it drifted past. We stood there watching as it completed a slow, deliberate circle around the island. Not fast, not erratic, controlled. Like the operator was scanning the shoreline. "What's he doing, Sam?" Moderate. The boat came around again, closer this time. I could see the operator in the cabin, but the glare off the water made it hard to read his expression. Marcus grabbed the handheld radio. "Supply. This is station. You're clear to dock." Static, then a voice, strained and brief. "Stand by." The boat continued idling just offshore. We waited. Another pass around the island. Slower. "Station. Confirm." The voice crackled back, then cut out mid-sentence. Marcus tried again. "Confirm what?" "You're breaking up." Nothing. The boat's engine revved, slightly, then steadied. It made one final pass, farther out this time, beyond the usual approach line. Then it turned toward open water. At first, none of us spoke. We just watched it shrink against the horizon. "They'll come back," Sam said. But it sounded like he was convincing himself. We returned to the lab and tried the radio repeatedly. No response. Not even static. By evening, the generator hummed a little louder in the quiet. The island felt different. Before, isolation had been part of the agreement. We knew the schedule. We knew the exits. Now, something had changed without explanation, and whoever or whatever had been adjusting our equipment, pacing closer to the cabins, mirroring my voice over the radio, had known exactly when the boat was supposed to dock, and that it didn't. The storage room incident, the generator never shut off at night. That was one of the first rules we learned. Fuel levels were monitored daily. Backup reserves were logged. If it ever failed, it would be because we'd made a mistake. It died at 1:12 a.m. The silence woke me before I understood why I was awake. No hum through the floorboards. No faint vibration in the walls. Just wind outside and the low, empty sound of nothing running. I sat up, waited for someone else to move in the next cabin. Nothing. I grabbed a flashlight in my boots. The air outside was colder than it should have been. The sky was clear. No storm, no reason for a fault. The path to the generator shed was short, 50 yards at most. My light cut across the dirt, over the brush, toward the small fuel storage building beside it. The first thing I noticed was the door. It was open, not wide, just slightly ajar. We kept it locked. Always. Marcus had reinforced that after the boat incident. Fuel was priority. No excuses. I told myself someone else must have gotten there first. Maybe Marcus heard the shutdown too. I pushed the door slowly. The beam of my flashlight swept across the interior wall, the stacked fuel cans, the shelf with spare filters. Then it stopped. On the floor, in the center of the shed, were my things. Not scattered, not dumped. Arranged: my field notebook, zipped. My handheld radio, the photo of my sister I kept tucked into my desk drawer, my spare flashlight, even the metal thermos I used during night checks, placed in a straight line across the concrete. Evenly spaced. I didn't move at first. My brain tried to process a version of this that made sense. Maybe the others were messing with me. A stupid joke, a pressure release, but none of it felt like that. The door atne, beam force. The padlock hung unbroken from the latch, unlocked but intact, which meant whoever did this had access. I stepped forward slowly. The concrete floor was dry. No muddy footprints, no scuff marks. I crouched and touched the edge of my notebook. It was real, slightly damp from the night air. All of these things had been inside my cabin when I went to sleep. Inside, I knew exactly where each one had been. I'd started paying attention weeks ago. The realization came quietly. This wasn't about shared space anymore. This wasn't random adjustment. Whoever had been moving things wasn't touching group equipment. They were touching mine, only mine. The generator loomed behind the shed, silent and dark. I forced myself to step outside and check the panel. The main fuel line valve had been closed manually. Not broken. Not failed. Turned off. I turned it back on with hands that didn't feel steady. When the generator roared back to life, the sound felt too loud. Too exposed. Light flooded the compound again. Cabin windows glowed softly across the clearing. I looked toward them, half expecting to see someone standing there watching. There was nothing. I gathered my items carefully, one by one, and carried them back to my cabin. I didn't wake the others immediately. Instead, I sat on my bunk and tried to decide which was worse. That someone on the island had taken my belongings while I slept, or that they had returned them neatly. Because neat meant deliberate, and deliberate meant personal. The final night on the island, I told them everything. Not dramatically. Not like I had just seen something impossible. I just laid the items out on the lab table and explained where they'd been found. No one laughed this time. Marcus checked the cabins himself. No signs of forced entry. Windows intact, locks unbroken. We searched the tree line in pairs until dusk, sweeping flashlights through brush and along the shoreline. There was nowhere obvious to hide. The island wasn't dense enough for that, which somehow made it worse. By nightfall, we agreed without saying it directly. We weren't sleeping separately. We moved into the main lab building, locked both entrances, pulled storage cabinets against the doors, kept lights on. The generator hummed steadily. Around midnight, the footsteps started. Not sprinting, not stomping, just walking, slow, even pacing around the perimeter of the building. Gravel crunching, then dirt, then graveled again as it circled. We froze the first time we heard it, thinking one of us had stepped outside. But we were all there, 5 of us, sitting in silence. The footsteps continued one full loop. Then, another. No attempt to open the doors. No knocking, no voice. Just presence. At one point, they stopped directly outside the wall near where I was sitting, close enough that I could hear the subtle shift of weight in the gravel. I held my breath without realizing it. After a few seconds, the pacing resumed. It went on for hours. Never rushed, never panicked. Like whoever was out there knew we weren't going anywhere. Just before sunrise, it stopped. Not faded. Stopped. We waited another 30 minutes before moving anything. At 12:17 p.m., we heard the boat engine, louder than usual. Faster. We stepped outside as it approached the dock without hesitation this time. The operator didn't shut off the engine fully. He just leaned out and shouted, "You need to pack essentials." Now, what happened Tuesday? Marcus called back. No time, the operator said. Orders from mainland. Immediate pickup. Why? He didn't answer that. We packed fast. Laptops, hard drives, minimal clothing. No ceremony. No discussion. As we pulled away from the island, I looked back at the cabins, the lab, the path between them. Nothing moved. The shoreline looked untouched. On the mainland, no one gave us an explanation. The project was suspended. That was the word they used. Weeks later, I downloaded the audio logs from the station's radio archive. I wanted to review the interference, to prove to myself it had happened the way I remembered. Most of the recordings were routine. Then I found one time-stamped 2:43 a.m. on the night before evacuation. There was no scheduled transmission at that hour. The recording began with silence. 10myvoiceclear.com. Station 3 readings. Stable. No equipment issues. Weather cleared. It was the exact phrasing I'd used during but I had been asleep at 2:43 a.m. The recording continued for 3 minutes. My voice listing inventory levels, fuel counts, weather data. All accurate, all delivered in my tone. No echo. No delay. Just me. I don't remember making that call, and no one has ever explained who received it.
Story 2.
The empty resort? We booked the island because it was cheap. That's the honest reason. 5 of us splitting an off-season Airbnb on a private island sounded impressive, until you realized the discount came from timing. Late October, too cold for tourists, too windy for boats most days. The listing described it as peacefully secluded. The owner lived on the mainland, about 20 minutes away by a small motorboat. He dropped us off with our bags, showed us the generator switch, the satellite internet modem, and the emergency flare kit, like he was giving a casual safety demo on a pontoon rental. You'll have the whole place, he said. No neighbors. No distractions. He smiled when he said that. The house was the only structure on the island. 2 stories. Wide deck facing the water. A narrow dock, stretching into dark, calm shoreline. Behind it, Low trees and brush that didn't look thick enough to hide anything. It felt peaceful, in a way that almost seemed staged. Inside, everything was clean and minimal. Open living area. Big windows. The kind of place influencers would rent for content. We made the obvious jokes immediately. "This is where the movie starts," Jason said, tossing his bag onto the couch. "Yeah," Maya added. "Off-season island rental. We deserve whatever happens." We laughed because it felt safe to laugh. It was just us. No staff. No other guests. No streetlights beyond the house. That first evening, we stood on the deck watching the owner's boat shrink toward the mainland. The water stretched out in every direction, flat and silver under the fading light. I remember thinking how quiet it was. Not city, not suburban quiet. Just empty. At the time, it felt like a break from noise. Later, I realized it meant something else entirely. There was nothing out there, which also meant if something did show up, we would see it coming. Or at least, that's what we told ourselves. The drone in the sky, we noticed it the second afternoon. Jason was skipping rocks off the dock when he pointed up and said, "Is that ours?" None of us owned a drone. It hovered maybe 50 feet above the shoreline on the western side of the island. Small, dark, hard to see against the pale sky, unless you focused. It didn't buzz loudly, the way cheaper models do. Just a faint mechanical hum if the wind dropped. "At least we're not that remote," Maya said. "Probably fishermen." That made sense. We'd seen a couple boats far off on the horizon earlier that day. Someone flying a drone over open water wasn't exactly suspicious. It stayed there for maybe 30 seconds. Didn't move closer. Didn't angle toward the house, just hovered. Then it drifted backward and lowered until the trees blocked our view. We didn't chase it. We didn't record it. It felt like one of those modern background details you ignore. That night, after dinner, we were inside, playing cards. When the internet cut out briefly, just a flicker, the modem lights blinked, then steadied again. "Satellite hiccup," I said. Around 11:40 p.m., I stepped onto the deck alone to take a call. The air was colder than earlier, and the water looked almost black under the moonlight. That's when I heard it again, the faint hum. I looked up slowly. There were no blinking navigation lights this time. No red or green indicators like you'd expect from a recreational drone. Just a dark shape suspended against the sky, higher than before. It wasn't pointing directly at the house. At least not obviously. But it was positioned in a way that felt intentional. Centered on the island. I stared at it for longer than I'm comfortable admitting. It didn't move, didn't advance, just held this position. After maybe a minute, it rose slightly, then drifted toward the eastern tree line and disappeared. I went back inside and mentioned it casually. "Same drone," I said. "No lights this time." Jason shrugged. "Probably testing night footage. Over a random rental house," Maya asked. Lauget? We're not that interesting." The next afternoon, it came back. Same spot, same height, same stillness. That's when the pattern started to form in my head. It never approached directly. It never dipped low enough for us to identify markings. It stayed just far enough away to feel explainable, but close enough to remind us it was there. And every time it left, it did so toward the same side of the island, where there was no dock and no boats. The knock pattern. The first knock came at 2:17 a.m. I know the exact time because I checked my phone immediately after it happened. 3 knocks. Not loud. Not violent. Just firm enough to echo through the wall near the kitchen. I thought someone inside had dropped something. Maybe Jason bumping into a cabinet. Then it came again. 3 evenly spaced knocks. From outside. We all froze at the same time, which told me it wasn't just in my head. "Did someone dock?" Maya whispered. There hadn't been an engine sound. No wake hitting the shore. The water had been calm when we went to bed. Jason grabbed the flashlight and moved toward the side door, while I checked the security camera feed on my phone. The owner had installed 2 exterior cameras, mostly covering the dock and the front deck. Nothing. No boat at the dock. No movement on the path. We stepped outside together. The air felt colder than it should have. The dock lines were still. No recent disturbance in the water. No footprints in the damp sand near the shoreline. We walked around the house perimeter with flashlights, beams sweeping across siding and brush. Nothing. We went back inside after 10 minutes, unsettled but trying to rationalize it. "Thermal expansion," Jason said. "Wood contracts at night." "It knocked," Maya replied. "Wood doesn't knock." We didn't argue much after that. The next night, we stayed up later on purpose. If something happened again, We wanted to hear it clearly. At 2:17 a.m., almost to the second, it came back. 3 knocks. Same side of the house. Same spacing. This time, we were already standing. Jason flung the door open immediately. Nothing. No drone overhead. No boat engine fading into the distance. The water was flat and empty. We checked the cameras again. Still, nothing. That's when it stopped feeling random. On the third night, we didn't mention the time. We just waited. At 2:17 a.m., the knocks came. But this time there were 4. 3 quick ones, then a pause. Then one softer knock. We all heard it. We all understood what that meant. Someone had added something, adjusted the pattern. Not dramatically, just enough to show awareness. We hadn't reacted much the first night. We'd rushed outside the second. Now, the knock had changed. Like whoever was out there had noticed our response and modified theirs. No attempt to break in. No escalation beyond that. Just enough to say, I know you're listening, and I know when you expect me. The phone signal tricked. The signal started acting strange the morning after the 4th knock. Up until then our phones had been useless, unless we stood at the far end of the dock. Even then, it was 1 weak bar at best. That was part of the appeal of the trip forced disconnection. Around noon, Maya held up a phone and said, "Why do I have full bars?" We all checked. Every one of us had full reception, not flickering. Solid. "That's not right," I said. Jason laughed. Maybe the wind shifted a tower closer. There were no towers anywhere near us. I tried calling my brother. The call button paused once, twice, then all the bars vanished. No service. The call failed instantly. Maya tried next. Same result. Full signal visible. The moment she hit call, it dropped to nothing. We stepped outside. Phones raised like we were searching for invisible satellites. Full bars again. "Okay, that's weird," Jason admitted. He tried recording a short video to send in our group chat back home. The moment he tapped send, signal gone. The pattern continued for the next hour. Full reception, while idle, total loss when attempting communication. It felt deliberate. That evening, we tried something else. Instead of calling out, we waited. At 8:42 p.m., Maya's phone buzzed. Voicemail, unknown number. The timestamp showed it had been recorded 3 minutes earlier. We gathered around as she played it. At first, it sounded blank, just faint background noise. Then we heard it. Laughter. Ours. Specifically the moment earlier that night when Jason had tripped on the rug and nearly knocked over a lamp. We'd all laughed loudly. I remembered that exact sound. The voicemail captured it clearly. From inside the house, we stared at each other in silence. "That's not possible," Jason said quietly. No one had called. No one had left the house. The owner was on the mainland. There were no neighbors. The voicemail ended abruptly after 15 seconds. No breathing, no movement, just our own laughter echoing back at us. Maya checked the metadata. It showed the recording was created locally, then sent through an unknown routing number. Locally, as in inside the same coverage zone we were standing in. The drone had stayed distant. The knocks had stayed outside. But this felt different. This was an observation from far away. This meant someone had been close enough to capture audio, close enough to record, and close enough to send it back to us. The boat that was untied. None of us slept much after the voicemail. We left the kitchen lights on. Someone was always half awake on the couch. Every small sound felt amplified. Wind against siding. Water brushing the dock. At 6:10 a.m., Jason looked out of the front window and said, "Where's the boat?" It took me a second to understand what he meant. The dock stretched out, empty. The rental boat was gone. We rushed outside barefoot, not even thinking about the cold. The dock lines were still there. Both ropes hung loose over the edge, ends resting against the wood. Not snapped, not frayed. Untied, I stepped to the edge of the dock and scanned the water. About 50 yards out, the boat drifted slowly, rocking gently in the early morning light. There hadn't been wind overnight. No storm, no wake from passing boats. Jason was the last one to secure it the night before. I'd watched him double knot the bowline. He was obsessive about that kind of thing. He stared at the loose rope now like it had personally betrayed him. "I tied this," he said. "I know I tied this." I crouched and picked up the end of the line. Tick note. Hadn't been ripped apart. It hadn't slipped. It had been cleanly untied. Whoever did it had taken the time to do it properly. We stood there for a few seconds that felt much longer. Then Maya said what none of us wanted to say out loud. If it drifts farther, we can't reach it. The owner had told us the spare fuel tank was stored in the house, not the boat. Without that boat, we weren't leaving unless someone came for us. Jason grabbed one of the spare life vests and started scanning for the kayak we'd seen tied along the side of the dock. It was still there. At least that. I'll paddle out and bring it back, he said. Don't go alone, I replied automatically. The words came out before I'd fully thought them through. We ended up sending 2 of us in the kayak. It took longer than expected to reach the boat. The current, subtle as it was, pushed it slightly east. From the dock, Maya and I watched them approach it. Nothing moved in the tree line. No drone in the sky. No boats on the horizon. Just open water. When they reached the boat and began towing it back, I felt something settle into place in my mind. The knocks hadn't tried to break in. The drone hadn't approached. The voicemail hadn't threatened. And now the boat hadn't been damaged. It had simply been untied. Each action removed something small. Certainty, comfort. Now mobility. Whoever was doing this wasn't trying to hurt us. They were adjusting our options. When the boat was finally secured, again Tripo nodded. This time we didn't feel relieved. We felt observed, because whoever had untied it knew exactly what that boat meant, and they hadn't needed to take it. Just to let it drift far enough to remind us how easily we could lose it. The island felt smaller after that. Not physically, just in the way you measure space when you realize your exits can disappear quietly. No confrontation came that morning. No footsteps, no drone. Which made it worse, because it meant whoever had been close enough to untie those ropes had left without us ever seeing them, and could probably do it again. Departure. We didn't wait for another night. Jason called the owner using the emergency satellite phone mounted near the breaker panel. It was supposed to be used for medical issues or severe weather. We didn't mention drones or knocks at first. We just said the boat had drifted and the signal was unstable. We wanted to leave early. There was a long pause on the other end. Then, I can be there in an hour. He sounded annoyed more than concerned. We packed quickly. No one joked this time. No one filmed a dramatic last morning on the island video. We moved quietly, like staying longer might require justification. While we waited on the dock, I scanned the sky without meaning to. No drone. The owner arrived just before noon. He cut the engine and stepped onto the dock, looking around like he expected visible damage. What's going on? He asked. Jason mentioned the boat drifting, the signal issues, the knocks. Eventually, the owner frowned. There's no one else with access. And there are no registered drone flights out here. I'd know airspace restrictions around the reserve. Could someone fly without registering? Maya asked. Technically, he said. But you'd hear it, and you'd see lights at night. We didn't argue. We loaded our bags. As the boat pulled away, I looked back at the house. In daylight, it looked harmless again. Clean, isolated, almost inviting. From the water, it seemed small. Contained. The owner talked the entire ride back, explaining how off-season rentals sometimes mess with people. Too quiet, he said. Brains filling gaps. No one responded. Back home, things returned to normal, faster than I expected. Classes, work shifts, noise, streetlights, neighbors. For a few weeks, the island started to feel exaggerated in my memory, like maybe isolation had amplified everything. Then the package arrived. No return address, just my name and apartment number, typed and printed. Inside was a stack of glossy photographs. Aerial shots of the island at night, the house lit up from inside. Deck lights glowing, shadows visible through the large windows. I flipped through them slowly. Different angles, different nights. Then I reached the last photo. It wasn't aerial. It was taken from inside the house. From the second-floor hallway, looking down toward the living room. All of us were visible, sitting around the table, laughing. The timestamp printed in the corner matched the night of the voicemail. The camera angle was slightly elevated, like it had been held by someone standing on the staircase behind us. I stared at that photo for a long time. There were no reflections in the window glass, no obvious editing artifacts. Just us, and whoever had been close enough to take it. No note was included. No message, no demand. Just proof. Proof that whatever had been hovering above the island hadn't needed to stay outside. And proof that leaving early hadn't meant we left unseen.
Story 3.
Bought for cheap. I didn't buy the island because I wanted adventure. I bought it because rent kept going up. I work remote, night shifts doing IT support for a logistics company. Midnight to 8 a.m. Headset on, screen glow, solving problems for people who never know where I am. When my lease ended and the renewal jumped another $300, I started looking at alternatives. That's how I found the listing. A small, wooded island, 15 minutes by boat from a rural shoreline. One cabin. Solar panels. Rainwater collection system. No neighbors. The price was low because most people didn't want the inconvenience. I saw efficiency. No commute. No rent. No noise complaints while I'm on calls at 3 a.m. Just water, trees, and a stable internet line through a directional antenna aimed at the mainland tower. The previous owner walked me through everything in one afternoon. Generator backup. Battery storage. How to tie off the boat properly. You get used to the quiet, he said. That was the appeal. The first week felt like I'd hacked the system. My expenses dropped overnight. My mornings ended with the sun rising over the water instead of city traffic. I slept during the day, worked at night, and barely saw another person. Isolation felt productive. Efficient. I told friends it was temporary. A year, maybe 2, save money. Reset. At night. During slow calls, I'd step onto the small deck and look out across the water. It felt like space. Like nothing could reach me out there. And for a while, I believed that the light across the water, the nearest island, was about a quarter-mile east. Just a low stretch of trees and rock. No structures. No dock. According to the county records I'd checked before buying mine, it was uninhabited conservation land. No camping allowed. The first time I saw the light, it was just after 2 a.m. I'd stepped outside during a slow stretch in my shift, headset still around my neck. Across the water, between the trees, something flickered. Not bright. Not like a spotlight. More like a lantern. A steady, warm glow about shoulder height above the ground. I leaned against the railing, squinting. It didn't move. It didn't sweep. It just stayed there. After maybe 10 seconds, it went out. Not faded. Switched off. I stood there another minute, waiting for it to return. Eat. Deeth. Vente. The next night, I told myself I'd imagined it. Reflection, distant boat, maybe someone passing through the channel with a small light. At 2:07 a.m., it appeared again. Same position, same height. I didn't move this time. I just watched from the deck. The moment I leaned forward slightly, trying to get a better angle through the trees, it went dark. The timing felt too clean. The third night, I stayed inside and watched from the window instead. The light came on at 2:05 a.m. I didn't step outside. I didn't move closer. It stayed on longer, almost like it was waiting for me to react. The message in the sand by the fourth night, I stopped pretending it was coincidence. The light had appeared 3 nights in a row, always between 2 o'clock and to 10 a.m., always in roughly the same spot. It turned off when I stepped outside. It stayed on longer when I didn't. I told myself there was a simple explanation. So the next afternoon, I took the kayak across. The water was calm. The paddle strokes felt louder than usual in the open space between the islands. As I got closer, the neighboring shoreline looked exactly like it always had. Trees, rocks, no dock, no obvious signs of use. I pulled the kayak up onto the damp sand and stepped out. That's when I saw it. Carved into the wet shoreline, large enough to read from a distance, was a single word. Stay. The letters faced my island, not the mainland. Mine. The sand around it was smooth, except for faint water lines from the tide. No footprints leading toward it, no drag marks, no signs of someone kneeling or standing nearby. I walked the length of the beach twice. Nothing. No lantern. No equipment. No evidence of anyone camping there. Who's that word? Perfectly spaced. Deep enough to survive until the next tide, facing my cabin. I stood there longer than I should have, starting at it, trying to convince myself it wasn't meant for me. But there was no one else to see it. The realization I installed 2 basic shoreline cameras the week I moved in. Nothing advanced, just Moshu-activated security cams, pointed toward the dock and the eastern waterline, mostly for insurance purposes. That night, after finding the message, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the word in my head, the way it faced my cabin, the clean edges of the letters. Around 4:00 after my shift ended, I opened the camera app. I scrolled back to the previous night. 2 a.m., nothing. 2:40 a.m., still nothing. Then 3:12 a.m., Motion detected. The feed from the eastern shoreline camera activated. I watched myself walk into frame. Barefoot, wearing the same hoodie I'd gone to bed in. My movements looked slow, unsteady, but deliberate. I stepped into the kayak, pushed off, and paddled toward the neighboring island. The timestamp continued running. I didn't remember any of it. The next clip showed me returning at 3:46 a.m., pulling the kayak up quietly, and walking back into the cabin without looking toward the camera once. No light across the water that night. No second figure. No drone. Just me. I replayed it 3 times. My face in the footage looked blank. Not panicked, not aware. Just focused on something I had already decided to do. The word stay was carved at a depth that matched the pressure I could see in my movements on the next clip from the kayak cam. There was no glitch in the footage. No missing frames. No evidence of anyone else being there. Which leaves me with 2 options. Either someone influenced me without ever appearing on camera, or I crossed that water alone and left a message for myself.